Hello, I am going to talk about the restoration of all things, aka the apocostasis. That is that comes to us from Acts 3:21, where Peter is preaching in the temple just after healing the lame man, and he speaks about the restoration of all things as part of the new covenant, and that is really the force of the gospel that comes from God himself. Jesus in the book of John says, "Behold, I make all things new." And when we look at our Nicene theology, um, the persons of the Son and the Holy Spirit, they're eternally generated from God the Father, the fountainhead of the Trinity. And so, yes, that is something inherent in Christianity, in the gospel, but it is something that is kind of against what we normally think of the world, because right now the law of decay and death are still reigning. That third law of thermodynamics is something we are still contending with, and it is something that is offset by things like the charisms and other things, but it will eventually be dealt with at the end of this age when Jesus comes back and restores all things. Unfortunately, in Christianity, especially in recent times, the apocostasis has taken on some heretical implications. And going back to early Christianity, there's a term called Origenism, which also relates to that. And there's different implications to that, but one of them is that, especially in recent times, some people think that hell is something that's a temporary state. And they read a lot of things in the idea that God is going to restore everything. Some people even believe that maybe Satan himself possibly could be restored. But certainly they would believe that sinners in hell at some point will be restored to God. And I just have to disagree with that and point out that they're reading a lot of things into that passage. For instance, the dead will be resurrected by God and will be given incorruptible bodies, and the earth will be restored. But you can be given an eternal incorruptible body and still sent to hell forever. In fact, being given that body, not only does it fulfill the verse, but it actually makes the idea of eternity possible. The fact that you're given something that's not going to wear out. In recent times, this has also been a verse for the Charismatic movement. In particular, I would point to the passage of Malachi 4, where it's prophesied about the coming of Elijah, turning the hearts of the fathers and the children toward one another. And people will make that as a verse of the coming of the apostles and prophets in the Charismatic movement, especially the Protestant end of it. And there's some possibility on that, in that passages of the Bible often have multiple levels of meaning. But for our purposes, I would relate it to kind of where my ministry is focused on, is the restoration of the apostolic heritage. And I would point to things like the convergence movement, where different charismatics like myself, after being in part of that movement, felt led by God to begin investigating early Christianity and often Eastern Christianity. And I would especially relate it to Earl Polk, was really the forerunner of much of what we know of the convergence movement. And Earl Polk, he's an interesting guy. A generation ago, before there was a charismatic Episcopal church, Earl Polk had this revelation of the end times. And what he believed that the traditional church, aka the clerical collar, pectoral collar, Catholic looking or Orthodox looking church, that there'd be a merger between that traditional end and the charismatic movement, And what it would be is you would get sort of the perfect Reese's peanut butter cup combination of power and authority, because the traditional end of the church often didn't have a lot of power, but they certainly had plenty of stability. And of course, the charismatics have the opposite problem. They can have miracles, but stability, different issues, that's always a problem with them. So for us, I really see that, and especially in our own, at least in our own stories with myself, that we really felt God leading us in this way. And in particular, if you're raised in evangelicism, I think there is an aspect where, unless it's really pointed out to you, you often don't understand the importance of the early church, that how much things in the Bible are relating to things from the apostolic fathers or Judaism that comes from that gospel age. You really need the context of that, but unless you're somehow the Holy Spirit leads you or someone else convinces you that, there's often not much an appetite to really want to study that. And so that, I believe, is something that God is doing in this generation. He's giving the early, us charismatics and Pentecostals, a heart for the early church. And he's also done the opposite work with some of the traditional end of the church, where the charismatic movement, especially in Catholicism and some other ones, they've woken up to the need for renewal in themselves. So if you like this video, I would ask that you like me on YouTube. Right now my channel has a bug where it looks like there's no content, but just like it to try to raise the visibility of it. And I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.